Join us now for the Reese Gardner Hour, an in-depth look at the people and issues that are changing the face of Kinston and Lenoir County today. And now here's your host, Reese Gardner.
All right, thank you very much, Walter, and folks, thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad that you did. We've got a great hour for you, a creative hour. I think it could be appropriately labeled that this particular evening, and I know that you're going to enjoy being with us. Our first guest is a gentleman who is really literally known, certainly in the movie making, the film world, throughout the world, and he has done many, many things. Certainly 20 years with Screen Gems. He's worked closely with people like Frank Capra. We'll get into some of that as we talk with him. And he also, I guess most important thing of all to us, is he is a Kinston native. We're talking about Gerald Waller. Gerald, good to have you back with us, sir.
Reese, how are you doing? Glad to be here today.
Wondrous. All right. Now, you are a Kinston native, right? That is right.
I am, and I have to come home every now and then and get recharged.
That's great. I love that.
Like
I love that because of things you're involved in. I want us to talk a lot during these few minutes we have together about the faces of India, and we'll explain that to our television audience in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about your association with, I mentioned Frank Capra, for example.
Right.
That name rings a bell with anybody who's in movies, understands movies. And also many others that you've been associated with, far too numerous to mention, I know, because you've worked on a very high, very important level in Screen Gems with a lot of these people. Off camera a moment ago, you mentioned another native of our part of the world, native of North Carolina anyway, Andy Griffith. You had an opportunity to work with him on Matlock, is that right?
Yeah, they brought the show from Los Angeles to Wilmington several years ago, and Andy wanted to get closer to home, which was the Outer Banks for him at the time.
That's right.
And he would fly home on the weekends. He would charter from Wilmington to the Outer Banks.
Yeah.
And, I was just very impressed with how hard Andy worked, even in those years. I mean, he had to be in his early 70s then, I would think.
Yeah.
And it's huge dialogue scenes that he would have. And as we were talking earlier, he would do his courtroom dialogue scenes on Mondays.
Yeah.
He would rest up over the weekend and rehearse his lines and do the heaviest dialogue. It would be on the first of the week.
Yeah.
So we'd always have the courtroom scenes on Monday. But huge part of the studio for I think it was 3 or 4 seasons. I think 3 that they were there.
Yeah.
And it was a real honor to
many of us who watch that show, and most people watching us right now, I'm pretty, I think, accurate in saying or know that show, the Matlock program. But also occasionally we would see Don Knotts on there, who played Barney on the Andy Griffith Show. Were you there when Don Knotts came?
They did a reunion, and when they did it on stage 2 on the studio lot, and Ron Howard and Jim Nabors came, and I had an opportunity to show Ron Howard the studio lot. And
that's Little Opie.
Little Opie, and I was just very impressed with how personable and polite he was, and just down to earth. And he's probably on the top 20 list in the industry in Hollywood and worldwide. And as we were talking earlier, came from the cradle up into the industry and has survived the best and worst of it. And very impressed. But it was really good to see all of them together. I was talking earlier too how this set reminded me of some of the Matlock sets we had with the flags and just the furniture and the
I'm glad it does. We're speaking of Ron Howard. We were watching one of his movies just the other day. Emma and my wife and I were watching one of his movies. And invariably, he would have his family members. He does have his family members in those movies, doesn't he? His mother would be in some, his father.
It's a family industry. And it's like Frank Capra and his father and family. Frank's sons, both of his sons, it becomes a family. When you come up in the industry that early and you attain those type of achievements, your family usually is involved in the family business. And I think that's true for a lot of Ron Howards and Frank Capra types.
I had Frank Capra on a few years ago, and he talked about people like Jimmy Stewart. It's a Wonderful Life, the movie that was still being played and played and played and played, and never will go old, I don't think. And other things, it's kind of fascinating to be around people like yourself.
Well, Frank, I think what got me is I didn't realize, I knew all the stories. I'd been in the industry for a number of years, but when Frank and I started working together as president and vice president in 1996, we would travel out to L.A. once or twice a year. And we were driving down, I was driving down Hollywood Boulevard, And Frank started pointing to all of these different areas and recollecting stories from his childhood that he did with his father.
Sure.
And I had to pause for a second and think, wait a minute, I wish I was recording this. Because those stories, I mean, he didn't realize, I didn't realize until that moment.
It was
just really how much part of a history in the film industry that is.
And I don't think he really even thinks about it. I mean,
he
like
doesn't.
that rare time that I had an opportunity to spend the time with him. I mean, he would just throw these names out as if, everybody knows them.
And I didn't until that point. And I hung up the phone with him as I was walking in the studio just to check on him, see how he's doing, and very, very glad to talk to him.
Did you really think he's doing fine, right?
He's doing good. He's doing good. He was at the studio this morning.
He is at the studio this morning. Okay.
I'm going to try to see him in a couple of weeks.
He was there this morning. Okay. That's great. Let's talk a little bit now about, I want to get back to this if we have time, but talk about the Faces of India. Okay. What is that about?
Faces of India. Faces of India is a non-scripted travelogue of a trip that I took to in June of this year. I just got back, actually July 9th.
Yeah.
I'd gone to China last year and just carried a good quality camera with me and spent 2 weeks with a group from Worldview out of UNC Chapel Hill. This group of academics and educators sponsored by UNC Chapel Hill that go to a foreign country once a year. And I had the opportunity to go last year, and I put that together into a video compilation called Faces of China. And I didn't realize until the second or third day there what I was getting was just very significant and could really have an impact with education in our classrooms across the state, and making people aware of just what it's like behind the scenes, so to speak, not the glossy discovery stuff or packaged media, but street level, what it's like in another country. Over 90% of our teachers in North Carolina have never been outside the United States. Hundreds of thousands of students that we have just really aren't aware of the world beyond their borders in the classroom. And recent polls indicate 63% of young people, 18 to 24, couldn't even find Iraq on a map when they were asked to do that. And those statistics are pretty much the same as when it comes to geography and understanding of the world. And getting to the root of that, most young people, 30%, less than 30%, thought that there was even a need to know where a country was about.
They didn't see any real significance.
In the papers. No, they really don't. And I think that that's something that we need to work on. And I think part of that we can do by, Faces of China, Faces of India is bringing some footage and letting them see firsthand what it's like in another country. So I did that. I was able to do that, go back to India, went to 5 cities, traveled by plane, bus, boat. I mean, we went to Varanasi, which is one of the holiest sites in India, about 6,000-year-old city actually, on the Ganges River, and witnessed some Hindu ceremonies. Taj Mahal, of course, everyone knows Taj Mahal, but also some other sites that are less heard about, and got some really good footage.
Yeah, everybody's heard about the Taj Mahal, but then there's a lot of other things in that great, huge land called India. Clark has a few things, I think a couple of clips in the
I think he has some of the Taj Mahal.
That I think we want to take a look at that. I believe, the Taj Mahal. What are we looking at?
This is a view you very seldom see. This is the backside of the Taj Mahal. It's on the river, and we were at a fort complex that is about a mile from the Taj Mahal, and that was the day before at sunset. And one thing I was very fortunate, we left right when monsoon season was supposed to start, and I had some of the most perfect weather for filming that you could ask for. This is coming into the entrance of the Taj Mahal, the site that everyone's most familiar with, and there, of course, the reflecting pools in front of the Taj Mahal. Again, the weather, this is the beginning of monsoon season, and I had just clear blue sky. This was about 6 a.m. in the morning, and I also was very fortunate not to have many people in my foreground as I was shooting the Taj Mahal.
That's true.
So what I did, I shot just various video clips so people could see some of the surrounding areas that they're less familiar with, and I shot well over 3,000 pictures and saved about 2,000 of those in high resolution that I also put into the video, but also making available on the website. And I've created a separate website for Faces of India, link to my website.
So it is going to be available on the website?
It's on the web now. It's on my website now, but I'm also going to put it on YouTube. And I've broken it down into different segments, so it can be incorporated in lesson plans, or if you want to see like a train ride in the countryside of India, you can go to and just keyword India train ride, and you see a high resolution clip. Of it. And I've tried to keep the clips between 5 and 6 minutes. So there's 18 episodes now. I'm going to add about 10 more. And I think it'd be very useful in the classroom, or someone just thinking about traveling to India, wanting to know a little bit more about it. They can go to these different sites as they're listed on the website. But I've also, with our group that went, there was about 35. Several copies have already gone out to them, and it's been shown to several students statewide already. So it's already getting the outreach that I wanted to get.
When people think of India, people who are not really into what goes on in India, they think of people like Mahatma Gandhi, you know. And,
I think there's 10 items maybe that everyone's familiar with, but India's not traveled much. It's not a tourist destination, and that was good for me to be able to get around and not be caught in all the congestion, and really get in with the locals and do some things that I wanted to do. But the other side of that is that it's the largest democracy in the world, and the average citizen knows very little about it in the United States.
Is it truly a democracy? I know it's called a democracy.
It is, but you know, there are a lot of things that in China at 1.3 billion that I saw were more free and able to do things there than you could in India. India has such a ancient history and culture that they're still connected to, that you get the impression with some things that that might also be a problem in living in today's standards and quality. You know, the caste system and poverty and illiteracy are huge in India. You know, it has the largest illiteracy rate in the world at 50% that can't even read or write. Poverty is huge. But on the other side, the people seem very happy in general, and it may be less is more in that case. When you see, you drive through the countryside, and I'm impressed that 3 times the population of the United States living on 1/3 the landmass, that there is such wide open space. But then your average home, you may have 13, 15 people living in one home. So it's a much denser living environment. So that, I guess, weighs out some of the, you know, the cities are certainly congested, larger cities, but there are rural countryside.
They're not really accustomed to the space, for example, that we have in our lives here. When you might have 2 or 3 people living in a rather large home, they don't have that there, not generally.
But they really don't want that either. They love the sense of community and family, the very strong
the togetherness.
I was talking to a cultural minister, equivalent to a cultural minister, and I had mentioned something about maybe the ancient culture and the 13 different languages being a problem for India to meet the needs, and its environment being a problem. And she was real quick to point out that in the U.S. we had our own problems, and she spoke for about 10 minutes about Katrina. And I felt like I was being chastised a little bit. And I really hadn't made a suggestion. I was more of a question than a suggestion. But
she threw that back.
She really came on strong with that. And I was really surprised that overall favorable opinion by most Indians is not too great of the United States right now. It's about 54%.
A lot of that has to do with the media, doesn't it? I mean,
well, I think what I found in China and in India,
I mean, even our media.
In recent, yes, it is, and it's what we export. They see us as a violent, greedy nation, and I think part of that is the media. Part of it's what's happened in Iraq. Part of it is, you know, after World War II, we had the Marshall Plan, where we spent the equivalent of $500 billion to rebuild countries, and in Europe and in goodwill. And we were the hero of the world in 1947 till, you know, on. And I think people from around the world are starting to lose memory of that and see us in a different light now.
What have you done for me
They
lately?
see the boots. They don't see as much goodwill. They're concerned about our military and you know, are we going to continue to be aggressive and
How did
defense.
how many languages are in India?
There are 13 official languages. There are several dozen more. And what is India until the 1940s, after the British left and Gandhi and Nehru came in, and India as a democracy is relatively young, 1948. So really you had, India was 13 major provinces at the time. Yeah. So it was like 13 separate countries within a country. And then there was, of course, the Hindu population being about 800 million today, Muslim population about 225 million. When 1948 came upon, there was, what the Muslims wanted a state of their own, which Pakistan came from that.
I see.
And the large group of Muslims settled in Pakistan, became a Muslim nation, and but Pakistan would have been part of Greater India during the British so-called empire days.
There seems to be a constant conflict between Pakistan and India.
I think it's more Muslim-Hindu conflict.
Anyway, I'm really looking forward to this documentary, and I know people are going to want to see this because you obviously did an exhaustive study. You were very obviously, it shows right now, enthusiastic about this work, and it had to be pretty arduous at times. There's no question about that. And I'm sure there must have been some times along the way when you must have said, what am I doing this for? I mean, this is really tough here.
I broke down the fourth day. I was so exhausted from jet lag and the hours, and just to me, I'm just visually stimulated. I mean, I see everything around me. I look at the colors. I look at how old something is. I've got to take everything in.
Yes.
And by the third day, I was exhausted from taking everything in. If I hadn't been filming, I hadn't been doing anything, just absorbing that information was overwhelming. And because it's visual, just candy everywhere to me. And but you're looking at such an ancient culture that is so different from what we know. We get used to riding through the countryside, and we're used to that countryside. But when you're in a place like India or China, and it's so different from what you know, you have to stop and breathe and take in every moment. I mean, the sights, the sounds, just the odor, everything's so different that your senses are just overwhelmed.
How long were you there?
Just a couple of weeks, and I would have liked to stay longer, but I don't know that I could have stayed much longer. I was exhausted on coming back.
I imagine so. Now, are you, a couple of other things I want to touch on before I let you go. Are you a martial arts enthusiast, and if so, why?
I love the martial arts. I think it went back to, I started boxing when I was 17. I was looking to get out of some bad habits that I was in as a teenager and physical fitness, and I really believe that your body is the temple of the Lord and those kind of things, and I wanted to take better care of myself. And then I started to, and I was a big Bruce Lee fan, and I just started meeting different martial artists in the film industry, and it seemed to, I don't know if we'd call it fate or for whatever reason. I did produce 2 martial arts films, but it seems like I was meeting more people in the martial arts industry because of, I guess, the film industry, and I became even closer to it because of that. But the mental and physical side of it's just always been a part of personal growth for myself.
And now you're teaching at James Sprunt Community College. Most people watching us now know exactly where that is.
I hope they do, and I want to see. We're trying to make people more aware of what we're doing at James Sprunt. I'm there 2 years now, 2.5 years, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I almost think if I had stayed in Kinston as a child, I might be at the same place that I've almost come back closer to home.
Around the world.
But
and
I'm going
back
to tell you,
here.
when it wasn't something I was seeking, it's something that happened, and I absolutely love being there.
Well, I don't hesitate to say that those whom you teach are very fortunate.
Well, I'm very fortunate to have them as students.
Very fortunate. In the film industry now, I'm just curious about what led you in that direction.
That was another thing. It wasn't anything I was looking for. It's kind of like the teaching career, and I think different things that I've had in life come about weren't planned. The trip to India wasn't planned. The trip to China wasn't planned. So I think there's been a greater power that's kind of defined where Gerald Waller is going to be at. But I came through that in 1983 when Firestarter was filming in Wilmington, North Carolina. They needed some electrical work, and I happened to be service department manager for the largest electrical contractor in Wilmington. Started doing work for them through that, and they asked me to come on full time, so I did as studio engineer, and then from studio engineer to facility manager, and then 1996 as vice president of operations.
I teach in Wilmington every now and then in the evenings, and it's always interesting, and it doesn't happen often, but when I do see it, say around 9 o'clock at night, sometimes when I'm leaving my classroom area, I'll see a film, something being filmed there, right there.
Yep.
You know, it's really something how over the past 30 years or so that the film world has really come to North Carolina.
It has, and I was looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics this morning. I was going over some numbers about the projections for the film industry and job placement, and they mentioned New York, LA, and specifically Wilmington, North Carolina as being one of the top production centers in the world. Still, and at one time it was 12% of the regional economy, 11-12%. That was several years ago. It's not today, but it's still there. I think it's going to be viable for years to come. I think that you know, the seeds were planted 30 years ago.
Yes.
And I think North Carolina is just going to be a good choice for filmmakers for many years to come.
Would you care now in the remaining 2 or 3 minutes, if you don't mind, and I know this is a big assignment to do this, but to name 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 notables in the film industry whom you have gotten to know very well. I know you mentioned Andy Griffith.
There are so many. I think, you know, with over 200 films the year that I was there.
There's been so many.
You
Burt
know,
Reynolds,
there are
maybe,
Burt Reynolds, absolutely, very nice. You know, he did a film called Waterproof with Frank a few years ago, and Burt was always joking, playing around, nice guy.
Type.
Pierce Bronson walks in my office one day and asked me if I know where to turn the air conditioner up at. He was freezing in his dressing room.
Fantastic.
Around the corner. Julia Roberts I met early on, and when she came in, Sleeping with the Enemy. Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, I was a fan of his when I met him early in the game.
Especially
Nick
with
Nolte,
the martial arts connection there too.
Yeah, there's so many. I think everybody that works in the industry has come through Wilmington one time.
Wow.
They've at least been through for
and some are living there now. Some
many have bought second homes. I mean, one of the first ones, Dennis Hopper bought a building downtown, and you know, it's always partly for investment reasons and partly because they just find an attractive place to live also. So it's really heightened, I think, a global awareness of Wilmington, North Carolina.
Speaking of Burt Reynolds, where was Deliverance done?
I'm not sure. I think it wasn't North Carolina.
No.
And I don't recall. I remember. I think it was Tennessee because of the Tennessee Valley Authority. They actually did work something out with the water. There's a scene at the end. I'm almost certain it was Tennessee.
But Burt's just like we would perceive him. I mean, we
very laid back, and most of them are. I mean, you know, they're just people. They come to work, and I think I never looked at them any differently than that. And I think most of them appreciate it because of that, because they, you know, they really do live a different life, and it's tough for many of them, and I think we see that with a lot of the young actors now that struggle with their own identity because of what is created for them in the process of their career. And that's part of the reason, I'll be honest with you, that I wanted to step away from it, you know, because it's a different kind of demand on you.
No doubt about it.
Most
Gerald, I want to thank you. It's been fascinating having you here. It really has been. And I know so many things are going on in your world, and they will continue, I'm sure, to even accelerate because you're so creative and you're looking for different things to really get into and to involve other people in. So that's wonderful. And I want to thank you for sharing this time. Any closing comments you'd like to make?
I'm glad to be on the show, and I'm glad to always come and talk about things that I am doing, and I'm glad that there's an interest in those things. And
no doubt about that.
I would definitely continue to do things that I hope I can bring back home.
Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you.
Folks, I know you've enjoyed this conversation with Gerald Waller. He is to say the least, a notable in the world of films, and that's really throughout the world. And now his documentary that he's done on the faces of India, that's fascinating in and of itself. And as we mentioned earlier, as in everything that Gerald Waller's involved in, there's a lot of enthusiasm involved in it, a lot of creativeness that's involved in it, and it shows whenever we see it. You see it, all of us do, that really does come to the fore and makes it not only interesting, but highly informative, as this will be, I'm sure. Please stay with us. Stuart Johnson is coming up and Laura Lee Sylvester, so don't go away.